On June 4th, 1783, in the town square of Annonay, France, two brothers named Joseph Michel and Jacques-Étienne Montgolfier set fire to a pile of straw and wool beneath a large linen bag. The bag filled with hot air and rose. It rose to approximately 1,000 meters, roughly the height of 3 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other, and traveled 2 kilometers before descending into a field on the edge of town. The entire flight lasted 10 minutes. The crowd in the town square watched it go, and, by every contemporaneous account, were absolutely terrified. Not excited, not inspired, not filled with the wonder of witnessing the first successful demonstration of human flight technology in recorded history. Terrified. Because what they had seen, a large object rising without wings, without apparent mechanism, without any physical explanation available to the framework through which they understood the world, was not, in the experience of the people watching it, a scientific demonstration. It was a sign. The question was not what it was made of, or how it worked. The question was what it meant, and the answer that a significant portion of the watching world arrived at, with a speed and a consistency that tells you something important about how the 18th century understood the boundary between the natural and the supernatural, was this: nothing that rises into the air without wings belongs to the natural order. Nothing that rises into the air without wings and is made by human hands belongs to God. What the Montgolfier brothers had built, in the theological imagination of their era, was not an aircraft. It was a provocation. And before this story is over, you will understand how the most extraordinary human achievement of the 18th century, the first technology in the history of civilization to lift a human being off the surface of the earth, was greeted, in the communities where it landed, with pitchforks, with scythes, and in at least one documented case, with a cannon. To understand why the balloon was terrifying, you have to understand what the sky meant before anyone had been in it. The sky was not, in the framework of 18th century European thought, a neutral space. It was not simply the region above the ground where weather occurred and birds flew and stars were visible at night. It was the boundary, the specific, theologically significant boundary between the human world, the world of earth and stone and flesh and sin, and the divine world that existed above it. The sky was where heaven was. The sky was where God's presence was most directly felt, where lightning came from, where the voice of God had spoken from, where the souls of the righteous ascended after death, and where the souls of the damned did not. To enter the sky was not a geographical ambition. It was a theological statement. And the theological tradition of the Western world had a clear and long-standing position on human beings who attempted to enter divine space through their own agency. It did not go well. Icarus flew too close to the sun and fell into the sea. The builders of the Tower of Babel reached for heaven and were scattered across the earth with their language fragmented. The ambition to transcend human limits, to reach the domain of God through human engineering, was not merely impractical in the biblical tradition. It was the definition of hubris. It was the sin that preceded all other sins. Into this framework, on the morning of June 4, 1783, the Montgolfier brothers released a bag of hot air. The brothers had arrived at the principle of hot air flight through a characteristically 18th century combination of systematic observation and complete theoretical misunderstanding. Joseph Michel Montgolfier, the elder of the two, the conceptual originator of the project, had been fascinated since childhood by the behavior of smoke rising from fires. He observed, correctly, that smoke rose. He concluded, incorrectly, that this rising property was intrinsic to a special gas produced by combustion, a gas he called Montgolfier gas, that was lighter than air and possessed specific buoyant properties. He was wrong about the mechanism. There is no Montgolfier gas. Hot air rises because it is less dense than the cooler air surrounding it, a property of thermal expansion that has nothing to do with combustion specifically, and everything to do with the relationship between temperature and molecular density. But his wrong theory produced the right experiment. He built a small model envelope, lit a fire beneath it, and watched it rise to the ceiling of his workshop. He built a larger one. It rose out of his workshop and was never recovered. He built a larger one, still, and invited his brother to participate. And on June 4, 1783, in the town square of Annonay, they demonstrated what they had built to the local authorities, and a crowd that had gathered to witness something they had been told was extraordinary. It was extraordinary. It was also, in the terms available to the people watching it, inexplicable. The reports that spread from Annonay across France in the weeks following the demonstration described the event in language that oscillated between scientific wonder and genuine fear. The balloon was large, approximately 11 meters in diameter. It rose faster than anyone had expected. It was silent. Its silence, in accounts written by eyewitnesses, was one of the most disturbing aspects of the event. Something that large, rising that quickly, making no sound. It violated every intuition that experience of the physical world had provided. It looked, multiple accounts agreed, like nothing that should exist. And in the fields and villages where it descended, the people who had not seen it rise, who encountered it suddenly in their landscape, a large, apparently living thing falling from the sky, responded accordingly. The first balloon that landed among people who had not witnessed its launch landed near Gonesse, a village 12 kilometers north of Paris, on August 27, 1783. It was not a Montgolfier design. It was a hydrogen balloon, built by the physicist Jacques Charles and two brothers named Robert, launched from the Champ de Mars in Paris as a demonstration of the new technology to a crowd estimated at 300,000 people, one of the largest public gatherings in European history to that point. The balloon rose, was carried northeast by the wind, flew for 45 minutes, and landed in a field outside Gonesse. The peasants of Gonesse had not been informed that a balloon was coming. They saw it descend from the sky. It was approximately 4 meters in diameter, made of rubberized silk, and as it descended it was still emitting the hydrogen that was leaking from the valve used to regulate altitude. The gas, under pressure, produced a hissing sound. The fabric moved as the gas escaped. The peasants of Gonesse beat it to death with pitchforks and scythes. This is not a folk legend. It is documented in contemporary accounts, including a report filed by the local authorities. The peasants attacked the balloon with agricultural tools, apparently believing it to be a living creature of supernatural origin. Several accounts describe the participants tying what remained of it to a horse's tail and dragging it across a field until it was fully destroyed. The King of France, Louis XVI, subsequently issued a royal decree, distributed by means of hot air balloon, in one of the more poetically appropriate administrative decisions in French history, informing the population of France that balloons were human inventions, not demonic manifestations, and that persons encountering them should not be alarmed. The decree was not, by all evidence, immediately effective. The theological response to the balloon was not confined to French peasants with pitchforks. It was institutional, organized, and in some cases, legally consequential. The Catholic Church in France and its neighboring countries issued pastoral communications, addressing the balloon with a seriousness that reflected the genuine institutional concern that a technology capable of ascending into the sky provoked in an organization whose cosmological framework assigned specific significance to what was above and what was below. The argument against the balloon was not identical to the argument against the lightning rod. It did not claim that the balloon was interfering with divine providence in a technical sense. It was more visceral and more fundamental. God had given human beings the earth. He had given birds the air. The division was natural, which meant it was divinely intended, which meant human technology that violated it was stepping outside the order God had established. This argument appeared in sermons, in theological pamphlets, and in the correspondence of clergy who took the balloon seriously enough to address it formally. It was also made by scientists, or natural philosophers, as they would have called themselves, who were not operating from theological premises, but from a different kind of conservatism, the sense that the sky, as a domain of weather systems and atmospheric phenomena, imperfectly understood, was not a space that human beings could enter safely, let alone usefully. Benjamin Franklin was in Paris when the first balloon flights occurred. He was there as American ambassador, the same role he had occupied during the lightning rod controversy, and he watched the demonstrations with the specific interest of a man who had spent considerable professional time thinking about what happened when human technology engaged with the atmosphere. He was enthusiastic, characteristically, when another observer, watching a balloon demonstration, asked what possible use the invention could have. Franklin replied with what has become the most famous dismissal of premature skepticism in the history of technology. What is the use of a newborn baby? He understood what the skeptics did not, that the balloon was not a finished technology, but an existence proof. It demonstrated that human flight was possible, which was the only thing that needed to be demonstrated in 1783. Everything else was engineering. The first human beings to ascend in a balloon were not, initially, human. The Montgolfier brothers, preparing for a crewed flight but uncertain whether human beings could survive at altitude, whether the air above a certain height was breathable, whether the cold would be lethal, whether there were forces operating in the upper atmosphere that killed things that entered it, proposed to the Académie des Sciences that the first passengers should be animals. The Académie agreed. On September 19, 1783, at the Palace of Versailles, before King Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and a crowd of approximately 100,000 people, a Montgolfier balloon rose carrying a sheep, a duck, and a rooster in a wicker basket attached beneath its envelope. The sheep was chosen because its physiology was considered similar enough to human physiology to serve as a meaningful test subject. The duck was chosen because it was already known to survive at altitude. It could fly, and so any harm that came to the duck could be attributed to the balloon itself rather than the altitude. The rooster was chosen because it could not fly particularly high, and would therefore serve as a control against which the duck's results could be compared. This is 18th century experimental methodology, applied to the question of whether the sky would kill you if you went up in it. The balloon flew for approximately 8 minutes and landed 2 kilometers from Versailles. The sheep had kicked the rooster during the flight, bruising it. Otherwise, all 3 animals were unharmed. The conclusion drawn was that altitude was survivable. 2 months later, on November 21, 1783, 2 men, Jean-François Pilatre de Rosière and the Marquis d'Arland, ascended from the Bois de Boulogne in Paris in a Montgolfier balloon and flew for 25 minutes over the city, reaching a height of approximately 900 meters before landing safely in a field outside the city walls. Human beings had left the surface of the earth for the first time in history. De Rosière brought a bucket of water and a sponge on the flight in case the balloon caught fire. The Marquis brought a walking stick. For what purpose the Marquis brought the walking stick, history does not record. The military understood what the philosophers and the clergy were still debating. Within a decade of the first balloon flights, the French Revolutionary Army had established the world's first military air corps, the aeronauts, operating observation balloons tethered above battlefields to provide commanders with a view of enemy positions that no ground-based observation could achieve. At the Battle of Fleurus in 1794, a significant French revolutionary engagement against the Austrian Netherlands, French commanders used balloon observation to monitor Austrian troop movements and adjust their own dispositions accordingly. The French won. Whether the balloon was decisive is debated by military historians. That it provided a capability unavailable to the Austrians is not. The weapons application that the theology and the philosophy had been unable to prevent was demonstrated within 11 years of the first flight. Every subsequent military technology that depends on aerial observation, from World War I reconnaissance photography to modern satellite surveillance, traces its direct institutional ancestry to the aeronauts and their tethered balloons over Fleurus. Napoleon disbanded the aeronauts in 1799. He found the logistics of balloon operation impractical in his style of warfare. He was wrong. But he was Napoleon, and when Napoleon found something impractical, it was disbanded. The peasants of Gonesse who beat the hydrogen balloon to death with pitchforks were not stupid. They were responding rationally to something that violated every category of experience their world had given them. Something large, something from the sky, something that hissed and moved and descended without warning into their field. They did what their understanding of the world told them to do. They were wrong about what it was. They were not wrong that it was something new, something that did not fit the framework, something that required a response. Their response was pitchforks. The framework that told them the sky was God's domain and that objects descending from it were supernatural was a framework that had organized human understanding of the world for the entirety of recorded history. It was wrong about the balloon. It was also wrong about lightning, wrong about porcelain, wrong about the telescope, wrong about the printing press, and wrong about the potato. The framework was wrong, repeatedly and consequentially, about everything that arrived from outside its assumptions. And yet the peasants of Gonesse cannot be held to a standard that the natural philosophers and the clergy and the kings of Europe were also failing to meet, with more education, more time, and more resources for thinking carefully about what the balloon was and what it meant. What the balloon was simple. Hot air, enclosed in fabric, rising because warm air is less dense than cool air. What it meant took longer. It meant that the sky was not a boundary. It was a destination. It meant that the theological geography of above and below, heaven overhead, earth underfoot, the sky as the uncrossable threshold between the human and the divine, was not a description of reality. It was a description of the limits of what human beings had been able to do. And those limits had just changed. The Montgolfier brothers did not intend to dismantle a cosmological framework when they lit a fire under a linen bag in Annonay. They intended to see if the bag would rise. It rose. And the framework, the 1,000-year-old, theologically certified, institutionally enforced understanding of what was above and what it meant to be below, came down with it. Not immediately, not without resistance, not without pitchforks in Gonesse and pastoral letters and royal decrees, and every instrument of institutional anxiety that the 18th century had available. But it came down. Because the bag had gone up. And once something has gone up, the argument that going up is impossible becomes very difficult to sustain. The sky is no longer the boundary between the human and the divine. It is, as anyone who has sat in a window seat at 35,000 feet, watching the curvature of the earth emerge above the cloud line can confirm, simply where we go now. The people of Gonesse would not recognize it. The Montgolfier brothers would.